June 27, 2022, San Antonio, Texas. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer. 103 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. At 5:37 p.m., a call came into the Bexar County Dispatch Center. A local worker had heard a faint cry coming from an abandoned semi-truck parked along a desolate stretch of Quintana Road, an industrial zone littered with gravel, tires, and broken fences. He thought it was a coyote, but what he found instead would become one of the darkest discoveries in modern American history. When officers arrived, the first thing they noticed was silence, the kind that feels heavier than noise. Then, a smell. Acrid, metallic, something no officer ever forgets. They pried open the back door. Inside the trailer, stacked on the metal floor like forgotten luggage, were human bodies. Men, women, teenagers, even small children, some still breathing faintly, for air that wasn't there. Others already gone, eyes open, faces glazed in sweat and dust. 53 people would never make it out alive. They had traveled over 1,500 miles, from Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico, chasing a dream that ended inside a steel tomb. "We've got multiple DOAs. Send every unit you have. This was not an accident. It was a system, a machine powered by desperation and greed." As investigators would soon learn, this truck wasn't just carrying human beings. It carried the truth about a billion-dollar network, one that trades lives for profit, hope for currency, and turns the American dream into a death sentence. To understand what happened that June day, we have to begin far from Texas, in the rural highlands of Central America, in villages where the soil is cracked, where parents skip meals so their children can eat, where the dream of America glows brighter than the sun. The world they came from, Guatemala's San Marcos region, Honduras's Cortez Valley, Mexico's Veracruz. In these places, life is not measured in years, but in choices. Stay and starve, or risk everything for a chance at survival. For decades, migration north has been more than a journey. It's a ritual. Entire families sell land, livestock, or take loans to pay smugglers, known locally as coyotes. The price of passage, between $6,000 and $10,000 per person, an impossible sum for most. But desperation has its own currency. In San Marcos, a mother named Rosa Perez told reporters she sold her last plot of cornfield to send her 19-year-old son, Mario, north. He was supposed to reach Houston, work in construction, and send money home. He never made it. Weeks later, she would recognize his shirt in a photo of the victims from San Antonio. Each migrant carried something invisible, not just hope, but trust. Trust in the smugglers who promised safety. Trust in the truck that was supposed to be climate-controlled. Trust that they would see another sunrise. The business of human smuggling. Human smuggling across the US-Mexico border isn't random. It's industrial. Experts estimate that by 2022, the trade was worth over $13 billion a year, run by criminal networks as organized as multinational corporations. Each migrant is treated like cargo, tagged, routed, and transferred between cells of smugglers controlling specific territories. The operation that led to San Antonio involved at least 3 vehicles, multiple drivers, and spotters using burner phones to evade law enforcement checkpoints. Smugglers referred to the trucks as cajas calientes, hot boxes. They pack 60 to 80 people into sealed trailers with no ventilation, counting on a fast, overnight run. But on June 27, 2022, something went wrong. The air conditioning unit failed, or was never turned on. Inside, the temperature rose past 125 degrees Fahrenheit, 51 degrees Celsius. Within minutes, oxygen levels plummeted. The human body begins to fail at 104 degrees Fahrenheit. By 107 degrees Fahrenheit, The brain swells. The heart races, then stops. Subpart 3. The journey north. The victims boarded the truck near Laredo, roughly 150 miles south of San Antonio. Some had already crossed the Rio Grande days earlier. They were told they'd be in Houston by nightfall. According to investigators, the trailer passed through at least 2 Border Patrol checkpoints, uninspected. Thermal imaging cameras failed to detect the bodies, possibly because the refrigeration unit's metal walls masked heat signatures. For nearly 4 hours, the truck traveled north along Interstate 35, a major smuggling artery. Inside, people begged for air. Some clawed at the walls. A 13-year-old survivor later told agents, "We started crying. The walls were too hot to touch. People were fainting. Someone banged the door until his hands bled." At 6:17 p.m., the truck stopped on Quintana Road, just outside San Antonio. The driver left it there. No one came back. The moment before discovery. By 7 p.m., the trailer had turned into a furnace. People inside had stripped off clothes, pressed against the metal door, trying to breathe through cracks. One survivor, later hospitalized, recalled seeing a young boy collapse against his mother's shoulder, both motionless before help arrived. It was around 6:50 p.m. when a nearby worker named Christian Martinez heard faint cries. He approached the truck, saw the door partially ajar, and called 911. His voice shook as he said, "There are people inside. They're not moving." Minutes later, police, fire, and EMT units flooded the area. But by then, most inside were beyond saving. Among the victims, 27 Mexicans, 14 Hondurans, 7 Guatemalans, and 2 Salvadorans. The youngest was 13, the oldest, 55. When dawn came the next morning, the world knew, and for investigators, this was only the beginning. By dawn on June 28th, the scene on Quintana Road had transformed into a fortress of flashing lights, investigators, and sorrow. 53 lives lost, and a single question echoing through the heat. Who was behind this? The man behind the wheel. The driver of the truck was identified as Homero Zamorano Jr., 45 years old, from Brownsville, Texas. A man with a long record: theft, drug possession, illegal firearm charges. He wasn't a mastermind, just a disposable cog in a larger machine. Investigators learned that Zamorano had been high on methamphetamine during the drive. Witnesses saw him running from the scene, hiding in the brush near the tracks. When police caught him, his shirt was soaked, his eyes glassy. He claimed he hadn't realized anyone was inside, but investigators knew better. On his phone, they found messages exchanged with an accomplice, coordinates, timing, coded phrases like "the load is secure" and "doors close tight." These weren't messages of ignorance. They were proof of coordination. Hours before the tragedy, he had sent a photo of the trailer to his partner, Christian Martinez, age 28. Martinez replied with a single line: "They said the AC is running. Keep your phone off till drop." But the AC never ran, and by the time Martinez's next message came, the people inside were already dying. The smuggling cell. This operation was part of a smuggling network operating from Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, just across the border. According to court records, it was run by a group known as Los Pochos. Their business model was simple: move people north, fast, and cheap. Each link in the chain had a job: recruiters in Central America who promised safe passage, guides who escorted groups through cartel-controlled routes, stash house operators who stored migrants before crossing, drivers and spotters who moved the final load. Each migrant's journey was recorded in a ledger: name, destination, payment. When someone died, the ledger was adjusted, as if a product had been damaged in transit. Homero Zamorano was one of several drivers used by the network, but his truck, a 2019 Volvo Semi with fake registration, was chosen because it could bypass checkpoints with cloned plates. The FBI and Homeland Security Investigations (HSI) would later confirm this was not an isolated event. Over 200 similar smuggling attempts had been intercepted in Texas that same year, but this one slipped through. Inside the investigation. For the medical examiners, it was a nightmare scene. Inside the trailer, the temperature had exceeded 125 degrees Fahrenheit. Bodies were found piled in corners, limbs intertwined. Some victims had burns on their backs and shoulders from touching the metal walls. The smell, a mix of heat, fuel, and death, clung to the air for days. Dr. Carla Torres, one of the Bexar County pathologists, described it later. Sad, it was like opening an oven. There was no air, only silence. Autopsies revealed that many had died from hyperthermia and dehydration, extreme heat stroke, others from suffocation, trapped beneath collapsing bodies. Among them were 3 children under 16. Identification became another challenge. Most victims carried no documents. Their clothes were soaked in sweat, and fingerprints were unreadable. Teams from Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras flew in DNA specialists to help identify remains. Each match meant a family waiting hundreds of miles away would finally get an answer, though never the one they prayed for. The world reacts. By June 29th, the story had dominated headlines worldwide. Presidents and ministers issued statements. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador called it a monstrous crime born from human desperation. U.S. President Joe Biden called it horrifying and heartbreaking. But beneath the political speeches, the reality was more complicated. Border enforcement had reached record intensity under both U.S. and Mexican governments. More checkpoints, more patrols, more restrictions, yet smugglers only adapted. The tighter the laws, the higher the prices, and the greater the risk. A Guatemalan mother interviewed by Reuters said, "Determined, if they close one door, we'll find another, because hunger doesn't stop." Human rights groups condemn the tragedy as a failure of both governments, a symptom of a system that criminalizes migration but not the conditions that cause it. 53 candles burned through the night, each flame swaying in the hot Texas air, each representing not just a life lost but a dream betrayed. The trail of accountability. In the weeks following the tragedy, the U.S. Department of Justice charged Homero Zamorano and Christian Martinez with multiple counts, including conspiracy to transport illegal aliens resulting in death, transportation of illegal aliens resulting in serious bodily injury and death. Each count carried the potential of the death penalty or life imprisonment. Federal prosecutors also arrested 2 other men in Texas, Juan Claudio de Luna Mendez and Juan Francisco de Luna Bilbao, found with weapons and vehicles linked to the truck's registration. Meanwhile, in Mexico, authorities began tracking the recruiters who had arranged the journey from Guatemala and Honduras. Some were captured, most vanished. As U.S. and Mexican investigators compared notes, a disturbing truth emerged. The smuggling ring had been advertising its services openly on Facebook and WhatsApp, offering climate-controlled travel and safe guaranteed delivery. The victims had believed those promises, and in that belief lay the fatal trap, the echo across borders. Between July 9th and 15th, 2022, the bodies of all 53 victims were flown home. Families gathered at airports clutching photos, rosaries, and documents. The air was heavy with grief, but also quiet dignity. In Guatemala, the government declared 3 days of national mourning. In Honduras, church bells rang across towns at noon. In Mexico, mass funerals filled cathedrals with hundreds of mourners. One of the victims, a 16-year-old named Melvin Lopez, had left behind a note to his mother before the trip. It read, "If I make it, I'll send for you. If I don't, remember I tried." Even as the world mourned, smugglers continued their business. Within weeks, another truck was intercepted in Eagle Pass, Texas. This one carrying 84 migrants, barely alive. The pattern hadn't stopped, it had evolved. Because the real force behind this tragedy wasn't just crime, it was demand. The endless push and pull between poverty and opportunity, between borders and dreams. The San Antonio case had revealed the scale of human suffering behind migration headlines, but investigators were only beginning to grasp the complexity of the web and the ruthlessness of the people running it. Every arrow led back to the same truth. This wasn't one man's crime. It was a network, a system built on human lives and powered by the silence of those who look away. The victim's journey. Every journey began with hope and desperation. Most of the 53 victims came from Mexico, Guatemala. The victim's journey. Every journey began with hope and desperation. Most of the 53 victims came from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, regions torn apart by poverty, violence, and political instability. Their stories echoed one another, families selling livestock, pawning jewelry, borrowing from neighbors just to pay the smugglers. For them, America was not a fantasy, it was survival. In the Guatemalan highlands, a 17-year-old boy named Wilmer Tulul left behind a handwritten note. "I'll make you proud, Mama. I'll build you a house." In Veracruz, Mexico, a young mother, Yesenia, sold her sewing machine to afford the trip. She carried with her a small plastic bag of baby clothes, planning to reunite with her husband already in Houston. Each believed they were stepping onto a path of opportunity, not into a trap. Survivors later testified that the smugglers had promised air-conditioned transport, food, and water for the trip. None of that was true. Once they crossed the Rio Grande, the truth set in. The smugglers saw them as cargo, not people. A 23-year-old survivor from Guatemala described the moment they were herded into the trailer. "They told us to stay quiet. There was no air. After an hour, babies started crying. After 2, people fainted." Inside the sealed container, temperatures soared. Panic spread. But for many, the instinct to stay silent, to not jeopardize their dream, overpowered the instinct to scream. When investigators later interviewed families back home, the grief was unbearable. Mothers clutched photos of their children in graduation gowns. Fathers held passports and baptism papers. Some still refused to believe the news. The Guatemalan Ministry of Foreign Affairs coordinated DNA tests to identify remains. Each positive match was followed by a coffin draped in a national flag, flown back home. Every repatriation ceremony was quiet, no speeches. The smuggler's machine. To understand how this could happen, one must understand the machinery of modern human smuggling. The 2022 San Antonio case wasn't an isolated incident. It was a node in a vast, decentralized system that stretches from Central America to Texas. The journey begins with recruiters, locals who target poor families, promising safe passage for a fee. They show photos of clean vans and guides in uniforms. Many claim they work with immigration authorities, lies that prey on trust. Next come the transportistas, drivers and middlemen who manage logistics. They coordinate with cartel-connected plazas, controlling border zones. Every crossing is taxed. Every vehicle is recorded. The U.S. side handlers then take over, often legal residents or citizens paid to drive loads from border cities to interior hubs like San Antonio or Houston. By the time the migrants reach the final leg of the journey, they've passed through 4 or 5 criminal hands. Each takes a cut. None take responsibility. The truck driver, Homero Zamorano Jr., was one of these final links. According to investigators, he was paid about $5,000 for the trip, money earned for silence and speed. Smuggling networks treat logistics like commerce. They schedule runs, assign routes, and calculate profit margins. A full truck means more profit, even if it means risking lives. A Homeland Security official summarized it grimly. Thoughtful. To them, people are just moving inventory, living, breathing product. The 2022 tragedy was proof that greed had overtaken caution. The smugglers ignored weather alerts, mechanical issues, and human limits. They had done dozens of runs before and never been caught. This time, the odds turned against them. What makes this machinery so resilient is its demand. For every crackdown, 100 more migrants line up to try again. Poverty feeds desperation, and desperation feeds profit. The San Antonio truck became a symbol of that moral collapse, a system where hope is monetized and death is written off as loss of cargo. The investigator's lens. When the first officers arrived at the scene, the magnitude of death was overwhelming. Veteran paramedics wept openly. Investigators had to take turns entering the trailer because of the stench and heat. San Antonio Police Department, Homeland Security Investigations, and Border Patrol formed a joint task force within hours. Their mission: find out who owned the truck, who drove it, and who profited from the bodies inside. The initial clue came from a simple object, the license plate. It was traced to a company in Alamo, Texas, registered under Juan Claudio de Luna Mendez. When agents raided his residence, they found multiple firearms, fake IDs, and a second truck. At the same time, surveillance footage from checkpoint cameras showed the vehicle passing through Encinal, Texas, about 35 miles from the border. The footage time-stamped the truck at 2:50 p.m., roughly 4 hours before the discovery. Investigators mapped the timeline. 10 a.m., truck leaves Laredo area. 12:30 p.m., passes checkpoint with decoy paperwork. 2:50 p.m., captured near Encinal. 6 p.m., found abandoned in San Antonio. The 150-mile route that should have taken 2 hours instead took nearly 6, a critical window where victims were dying inside. Forensic technicians worked day and night to gather data. They pulled fingerprints, extracted phone metadata, and even reconstructed WhatsApp group messages used by smugglers to coordinate drop-offs. Every detail mattered, not just to convict the guilty, but to reconstruct what those people endured minute by minute. One HSI agent described the emotional toll. Sad. We're trained to see bodies, but this was different. These weren't random victims. They were people who believed in us, in the country we represent. The investigation soon uncovered a chilling efficiency. The smugglers had used cloned registration numbers from legitimate trucking companies to disguise their vehicles. It was professional, calculated, and devastatingly successful until that night. For law enforcement, the case became a battle not only against criminals, but against a system where human life was the cheapest cargo on the road. The public and political reaction. The tragedy sent shockwaves far beyond Texas. Within 24 hours, global headlines declared it the deadliest migrant smuggling event in U.S. history. President Joe Biden called it sad, horrifying, and heartbreaking, while Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador demanded joint action to combat human trafficking networks. In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott blamed the federal government's border policies, while others argued that tougher enforcement was driving migrants into the hands of smugglers. The tragedy became a political battleground, fought over by those demanding stronger borders and those pleading for safer, legal pathways. For local communities, politics didn't matter. Churches opened their doors to host vigils. Volunteers lined the streets holding candles for victims they'd never met. In Guatemala City, hundreds gathered outside the U.S. Embassy, holding photos of missing relatives. In San Antonio, murals began to appear, portraits of faceless migrants surrounded by flames, painted with the words, "No son numeros, son vidas." They are not numbers, they are lives. News networks aired the haunting detail that the trailer was discovered on Quintana Road, just miles from Interstate 35, one of the busiest trade routes in North America. The irony wasn't lost on the public. A highway of commerce turned into a corridor of death. As the case unfolded, immigration activists called for systemic reform. One advocate, Jennifer Harbury, told reporters, "Annoyed. Every time we close one door, we push people toward the desert, the river, or the trucks." Sigh. This isn't migration, it's survival. The tragedy reignited debate about Title 42, the policy used to expel migrants during the pandemic. Many argued that restrictive measures had only made crossings more dangerous. But amid the noise, one truth stood unshaken. 53 people died chasing the same dream that built America. Their deaths became both a mirror and a message, reflecting a moral crisis that transcended borders. The day the truck was found, June 27, 2022, San Antonio, Texas. It was late afternoon and the sun hung heavy over the city, a furnace of dry heat, pushing temperatures beyond 100 degrees Fahrenheit, nearly 40 degrees Celsius. The air shimmered, concrete steamed. It was the kind of day when you could feel your lungs burn just from breathing. A few miles southwest of downtown, near Quintana Road, a tractor trailer stood quietly by a narrow stretch of brush. The engine was off. The metal sides radiated heat like an oven. To passers-by, it looked abandoned, just another freight truck sitting by the roadside. At around 5:51 p.m., a city worker, driving near the area, noticed something strange. Faint cries, muffled pounding, and what sounded like a plea for help. He stopped, uncertain. The truck's doors were shut, but as he moved closer, the smell hit him first. A thick, nauseating odor of decay and heat. Then silence. He called 911. When emergency responders arrived minutes later, they opened the rear doors, and what they saw would haunt them forever. Inside, bodies were piled across the floor, some slumped against each other, others sprawled motionless. Some still gasped faintly, struggling for air. Many were already gone. The heat inside was estimated to be over 150 degrees Fahrenheit, 65 degrees Celsius. A lethal, airless chamber of steel. 53 souls, men, women, children. Migrants from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. All victims of suffocation and heat stroke. Fire Chief Charles Hood would later say, "We're not supposed to open up a truck and see stacks of bodies." His voice trembled as he spoke. The scene quickly became one of the largest crime scenes in modern U.S. immigration history. Ambulances rushed survivors to hospitals. Law enforcement cordoned off the area. Drones hovered above. Reporters began to gather. By nightfall, the flashing red and blue lights stretched across the highway like a scar on the city. That day, San Antonio stopped, and the world started asking one question: who did this, and how did it happen again? Tracing the trail, the investigation moved fast. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and local police formed a joint task force within hours. Inside the truck, agents found multiple cell phones, ID cards, and a GPS device. The vehicle's registration led them to a semi-truck registered in Alamo, Texas, near the Mexico border. The trail began there. Survivors, recovering in hospitals, began to tell their stories through translators. They spoke of smugglers who promised a cool ride, assuring them air conditioning and safety. They paid thousands of dollars, money borrowed or saved from years of hard labor. But once inside the trailer, the conditions changed. No air, no water, no escape. The smugglers had packed them shoulder to shoulder, over 60 people in total, and sealed the doors shut. At first, they laughed, hopeful that freedom was hours away. But as the air thinned and heat thickened, panic set in. When people began fainting, some tried pounding on the doors. No one came. One survivor recalled hearing someone praying in the darkness. Dios mío, no quiero morir aquí. My God, I don't want to die here. Federal agents traced the truck's route through traffic cameras, from Laredo, near the border, to San Antonio. At checkpoint footage, they saw the truck pass without inspection, possibly due to fake paperwork. Then came the key break. A man found hiding in the nearby brush, pretending to be a survivor. When questioned, his story fell apart. His name was Homero Zamorano Jr., a 45-year-old U.S. citizen from Brownsville, Texas, the driver of the truck. Police found pictures on his phone, selfies taken inside the truck cabin while wearing a black shirt with white stripes, matching the CCTV footage from the checkpoint. Zamorano was arrested on the spot. But this was just the beginning. Unmasking the network behind Zamorano was an entire smuggling web, a cross-border pipeline stretching from Nuevo Laredo, Mexico to Houston, Texas. Phone records led investigators to Christian Martinez, a 28-year-old believed to be coordinating logistics. Messages between him and Zamorano revealed the chilling tone of the operation. One text read, "Check them before you go. There's too many." Another, "They're hot. The AC stopped." By the time Martinez received the message, it was already too late. DHS officials soon linked the truck to a human smuggling ring run by Mexican nationals living in Texas, part of a larger network moving migrants from border towns into major U.S. cities. Each migrant was charged between $8,000 and $12,000, depending on destination. The smugglers used safe houses, decoy vehicles, and encrypted communication. They had done it many times before, just smaller groups, shorter trips. But this time, greed overshadowed caution. They packed too many people. They drove too far. They left them too long. As evidence grew, prosecutors charged Zamorano and Martinez with transporting illegal aliens resulting in death, a federal crime carrying the death penalty or life imprisonment. Within days, 4 more men were indicted, those responsible for obtaining the truck, coordinating pickup points, and falsifying paperwork. The network began to crumble. Forensic teams reconstructed the timeline minute by minute. GPS data showed the truck's cooling system had failed hours before reaching San Antonio. The driver had likely ignored distress calls from passengers, fearing detection. The tragedy was no longer just an accident. It was premeditated negligence, born from profit and indifference. The breaking point. Within a week, the story had become global news. World leaders condemned it. The Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, called it a monstrous crime. U.S. President Joe Biden described it as horrific and heartbreaking, promising to crack down on smuggling networks exploiting vulnerable migrants. In San Antonio, vigils were held nightly. Rows of candles lined the streets where the truck had been found. Photos of the victims, smiling faces, children in school uniforms, flickered in the candlelight. At Our Lady of Guadalupe Church, Priests spoke of mercy, loss, and the cost of human desperation. Families from Mexico and Central America began arriving, clutching photos, waiting for news or bodies. The Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office worked day and night to identify the dead. Some had no documents, others had only phone numbers scribbled on scraps of paper. It took weeks to complete identification. 27 Mexicans, 14 Hondurans, 7 Guatemalans, and 2 Salvadorans among the confirmed dead. Back in Washington, congressional hearings began on border policy, security failures, and humanitarian responsibility. Officials debated technology, checkpoints, and penalties. But outside, immigrant rights groups demanded something deeper: dignity for the lost. The moment everything changed wasn't just the discovery of the truck. It was the realization that this wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a recurring tragedy, the same story, told with different names every few years. 2017, 10 migrants dead in a Walmart parking lot in San Antonio. 2003, 19 found dead in Victoria, Texas. Now, 2022, 53 lives lost in the same heat on the same road. This wasn't coincidence, it was a pattern, and it had reached its breaking point. As the investigation closed in, Zamorano and Martinez appeared in court. They sat silently as prosecutors read the charges. For the families watching, it wasn't closure. It was the beginning of a long road toward justice. And yet, even as the courtroom doors closed, the larger machine, the desperation, the border crossings, the promises of smugglers, kept turning elsewhere. The climax of this tragedy was not an explosion of violence or a sudden betrayal. It was quiet, slow, suffocating. 53 heartbeats fading in the dark, and the sound of silence when the doors finally opened. The legal battle begins. Federal prosecutors filed charges within 48 hours, transporting undocumented migrants resulting in death, conspiracy, and possession of firearms by illegal aliens. The maximum penalty, death or life imprisonment. Court documents revealed chilling indifference. Text messages between Martinez and other smugglers joked about, "Oh, another full load," days before the tragedy. In one message, a handler wrote, "Keep the door shut, no refunds." At preliminary hearings, relatives of the victims filled the courtroom gallery, clutching photographs. Translators whispered proceedings into headsets. Reporters described the tension as a silence heavier than grief. Defense attorneys argued that their clients were pawns for larger cartels, but prosecutors countered that greed required no orders. The evidence was overwhelming: GPS records, financial transfers, witness testimony, and forensic linkage. In 2024, a federal jury convicted Homero Zamorano Jr. and Christian Martinez on all counts. Each faces life without parole. Sentencing awaits appeal. Additional defendants in Mexico remain pending extradition. The verdict marked legal closure, but not moral relief. The family's long wait. Back in Guatemala, Honduras, and southern Mexico, the legal headlines meant little. What mattered was the return of their loved ones. The process was agonizingly slow. Identification required DNA confirmation and embassy coordination. Each body traveled thousands of miles home. When the first coffins arrived in Quetzaltenango, crowds lined the airport tarmac. Mothers wailed, collapsing as soldiers carried caskets draped in flags. One woman whispered, "He left to build a house. Now I must build his grave." Humanitarian organizations stepped in. UN Migration Agency, IOM, Red Cross, Catholic Relief Services, offering counseling and financial aid. But no program could replace the dreams buried inside those caskets. Local journalists documented survivors struggling with trauma. One young man, still on oxygen therapy, said, "When I close my eyes, I'm back in that truck." The tragedy rippled through villages. Migration paused for a month, then resumed. Hope, however fragile, refused to die. Policy, politics, and the border. In Washington, committees convened hearings on human smuggling. Lawmakers debated new technologies, thermal scanners, AI-driven vehicle profiling, and real-time cargo monitoring. Billions were proposed, few solutions agreed upon. Critics argued that deterrence alone wouldn't work. As long as inequality, violence, and climate change push people north, smugglers will find a way. Mexico and the U.S. signed a bilateral task force agreement to dismantle cross-border trafficking cells. Dozens were arrested within months, yet migrant caravans continued. For every ring shut down, another emerged. Analysts compared the trade to narcotics: high demand, high risk, higher profit. The 2022 case merely exposed how deeply human beings had been folded into the economics of migration. Still, some reforms took hold: stricter trucking permit verification, random trailer inspections, and coordinated heat alert systems across border states. Small victories, bought with enormous loss. Memory and meaning. A year later, at the site on Quintana Road, volunteers erected a permanent memorial, 53 steel silhouettes rising from the soil, each engraved with a name and a hometown. At sunset, the metal figures cast long shadows stretching toward the interstate, the same road that carried them to their fate. Families visit yearly. They leave flowers, rosaries, and handwritten letters. One note reads, "Forgive us for the world we built. Rest in the one you deserved." Documentaries, academic papers, and classroom discussions now reference the San Antonio truck as a turning point in U.S. migration history, a symbol of what happens when humanity yields to indifference. For investigators, the case remains a reminder carved into memory. One HSI agent said, quietly, during a press interview, "Thoughtful. Every time I see a semi on the highway, I wonder who's inside." The San Antonio tragedy forced a reckoning deeper than law or politics. It stripped the issue of migration down to its essence: human need confronting human neglect. 53 people from small towns and forgotten villages climbed into a truck believing it was a bridge to a better life. Instead, it became a tomb on wheels. Their story echoes across borders, challenging both governments and citizens to look beyond slogans. The question it leaves is brutally simple. When hope becomes illegal, what choice do the hopeless have? As the memorial lights flicker each night on Quintana Road, the hum of passing trucks fills the silence. Somewhere, another engine starts. Another journey begins. Proof that the forces driving migration have not changed. The lesson of 2022 endures. Behind every statistic is a heartbeat. Behind every policy, a person. And until dignity travels safer than profit, there will always be another truck waiting in the dark.